All right. Hello, I'm George Mendoza from the Philippine Ruby Users Group, and this is the seventh episode of the Philippine Ruby Group podcast. Uh, Today, I'll be sharing the spreadsheet that I'm using to estimate, uh, to record the requirements, or to record my requirements and to uh, set estimates. Yeah, there. So let's get started. Uh, Let me share my screen. Where is it? This one. Yes. So this is a sample of the estimates spreadsheet that I'm using. I'll I'll share a link later on in the YouTube page of this podcast. It's very simple. What we have here, three sheets for details, a summary, and an input sheet. I'll discuss the other two later. I'll just focus on the details for now. So some background on this estimate spreadsheet. So for a long time, I felt that writing estimates in an outline made sense because sometimes you have an outline and you have your requirements, and you want to break them down into smaller tasks, or you want to somehow group them in some kind of a tree format. And at the same time, I wanted a way to be able to set estimates for each particular uh, requirement that I have. Uh, so far, I haven't found any app or program uh, that can wherein you can write requirements in an outline format and then set estimates for each part of the outline. So this is my workaround for that particular problem. I figure that since it's possible for me to adjust the widths of a column, I might be able to do an outline on a spreadsheet. And surprisingly, it's this solution is quite good. So let me demonstrate here uh, a particular how this estimate spreadsheet works. We have several columns here for keeping track of different information about our requirement. So we have a version number here, a category. These are columns that I used to be able to filter requirements. In here, we have estimates and weighted estimates. I'll explain the weighted estimates later. Uh, I have a date completed column here. Then to that, I have I have separate remaining hours and completed hours columns. So let's say I want to add a feature to the Pinoy Ruby website. I want to be able to I want to be able as an admin I want to be able to add podcast episodes and for users to be able to see those podcast episodes over there. I have here on the top a task for that particular scenario. I like writing requirements in Gherkin format. So that's the format used by Cucumber, given when then. So let's say given I am signed in as an admin user. Um, when I go to make it very step by step. When I go to the admin page, then I should see a link to the manage podcast episodes admin. When I click the link, I should see list of podcast episodes. and I should see mm, link to add podcast episode. When I click add podcast link, then I should see add podcast form. When I submit a podcast, then I should then a regular user should be able to see podcast that I submitted. So pretty straightforward, similar to how you enter requirements in Cucumber. The good thing about I mentioned about having being able to write it in a spreadsheet in this format is that you can prettify it a bit. Maybe you can move the end inside like that. Another option is to put the then within the when statements. Uh, Whatever works for you. I've also, I don't know if I can demonstrate it here, but uh, it's not a good, this is not a good example. It's also like when I have rather than writing multiple scenarios for each particular path, sometimes for the purpose of writing an estimate, for the purpose of writing a requirements in this spreadsheet, what I like to do is group paths, different conditions within a single path. So, for example, you have a feature that involves that has two paths, one where the user is signed in and one where the user is not signed in. So what I do with an outline is I would maybe write it like, given I am user, and under that particular line, I would say, and I am signed in and I am signed out and I am not signed in. I I've experimented with this approach and I like it because it doesn't I don't have to I can I can write a particular story and put different variations of that story within the single within a single outline. It's for me when I present this to our client, to my boss, it's a lot easier for her to understand the requirements when I do it like that, rather than when I go the more cucumber style where I write one scenario for each particular one story for each particular scenario. But anyway, going back here to this scenario, now that I've written it down, the steps that I need to implement this scenario, okay, now's the time that I can add the estimates here. What I for now, let's just copy all of this, just edit them eventually. So let's ignore this version for now. This is useful if you have. For me, I like to keep track of the versions of a feature. Sometimes a feature changes requirements, has major requirements, and I like to see how much time I spent on the original version versus the updated version. Put here, this will be I estimate for implement for the rest of these lines. So estimating, So there are several ways we can do this. One way is to just estimate the top level, the top level uh, node of your outline. I can for estimate I can put 0 for the rest of the values here, and just say that I'm going to work 6 hours on this particular scenario as a whole. Another way is to put 0 for the top level and enter small values for each particular step. So let's say I'm going to work half an hour on each particular step. So initially, I like this approach because it scales and it's less on your part. You can just as the as your story becomes longer and includes more variations, more scenarios, then you put a single value for estimate for each line, and it's going to scale. If your story is long, then your estimate is going to be long. That's less hassle for me than trying to figure out the value, the estimate for the entire thing. So in this case, if I just put 30 minutes for each line here, then my estimate sets 5 hours to complete this particular scenario. Another way is to consider the time that you will take to think about the feature that you're going to implement. So let's say these steps here are purely for implementation, for coding. Let's say I'm going to take, let's say that let's hope, let's say that I stop saying, um, let's say that your estimate, I'm going to take maybe half a day to to think about this particular scenario, or to write it down, to study the current website and figure out how it works, etc. So let's put 3 hours. Is this a good estimate? Probably, because I'm not familiar yet with the Pinoy Ruby website. So there, uh, we now have an estimate for our particular task. Now in here, in our letter D column, we have a weighted estimate. So this is based on I calculate this weighted estimate based on my past velocity. Uh, Velocity for me is how fast you're working on a particular feature. If your velocity is 1, then if you estimate that you're going to take 1 day to implement that feature, then it's and you're pretty sure that you're going to implement that complete that feature in just 1 day. But say you've estimated that you're going to take 1 day on a feature and you were only able to complete it in 2 days. So that means your velocity is 0.5. And if you're able to complete that feature in half a day, then your velocity is 2. So this way, that velocity is recorded here in this inputs sheet. Let's check there. Let's see. Okay. I'm just checking if this is actually recording, and it is. So under here, under past velocity, I've entered 1. So let's put 0.8 here, which seems to be my current velocity when working on features. 0.8. If we go back to our details, you can see that our estimate now increased. So it and added, divided it by 0.8. So In our original estimate, it was just 8 hours, but now it's now 10. Okay, so the F column here is basically the same as your weighted number of remaining hours that you need to implement this feature. Uh, if I'm able to complete this particular design step today, I can enter here 121, and you can see that the remaining hours became 0, and the completed hours became the number of weighted hours. So that's pretty much it. If I'm able to complete all of this in one day, then all of the values will move to completed. So these are the details of the estimate. What I wanted what I wanted ever since is a way to figure out that if this is the number of hours remaining, when am I going to be able to when am I going to be able to complete this particular feature? For that, let's go to the summary page. So here, this summary page gets its from that details sheet. In here we have, for me, we have a development line, a code review line, and a verification line. In our In Love with Food, whenever we develop a feature, after development, we ask our teammate to review the code, and afterwards, once it's deployed to staging, our boss gets verify if it's working. Uh, the important part here is the remaining days column. Take note that the values I use here in the summary is days, while in the details I use hours. This is because I find it easier to compute half hour for our individual estimates in just hours. Whereas when talking about I would like to be able to express estimates more in days. So how hours are computed to days is calculated and using some values in the inputs sheet. We'll go over them in a bit. So in the remaining section, this part here for development, this one is taken from the remaining estimate column in details. So this column here. So that's summed up and converted into days, and that value is added to our remainder done by column here. So this column starts on the present day and just adds the value, just adds the total estimate to the date. So this is a running estimate, um, more or less. The code review and the verification lines here, I just set them to 1. Previously, I tried to be fancy with this and tried to set a formula for basing the code review on the number of hours I need to develop the feature. But it's hit and miss. So I figured, since I really can't determine how long my coworkers will be able to review the feature, let's just say I just go for the best case and just put they're going to take 1 day to review it and 1 day to verify it. Okay. As mentioned, that is the remaining days and the remaining done by columns. To the left is the initial estimate and initial estimated done by, which is similar. The only difference is that this takes into account the entire time and it has a start date wherein I started working on the feature. So going back to our, okay, maybe for this particular feature, let's say I'm going to work on it maybe next on January 14, January 24. That's Saturday. Okay. So if you notice, even though I said this feature is going to take 1 day to work to implement, notice that there's a 2 day difference between uh, the current date and the time that it's going to be finished. This is because I take into consideration the number of hours I work in a day and the number of development hours I work in a week. That's entered in our input sheet. So here, under, okay, under work hours per day, I've entered 6. So this means I'm working around 6 hours per day. Uh, might find this small, especially if you work in the office wherein you're working 9 to 5. But in my experience, if you work online and you try to really work at home and you really try to keep track of the number of hours that you're working, use hours that you take a break. For me, 6 is the magic number. That's the number of hours I work in a day that I feel productive. More than that, I feel overworked. And development days per week is the number of days that I spend on coding within the week. So here I entered 3.5. Uh, that's because you have to consider the number of hours that you spend time on code reviews, on meetings, emails, etc. So 3.5 is a bit good for me. But in this case, for this particular feature, I can only work on this maybe 1 day a week, maybe every Sunday if I'm lucky. So let's try one and see how this affects our estimate. Also in here, we have an actual hour spent. For now, let's just set it at 1. Because if I set it to 0, then I'm going to have a division by 0 error in the summary. Okay. Or let's just put it at 0.01. Not 0, but still small. There. That's not... Okay. That's ugly. Let's try 1. I'm wondering if my calculation for velocity is correct. But anyway, it looks my estimated dates for completion are correct. So based on this, based on doing here, complete this by January 29, and it's going to take some time before it gets verified and reviewed. I'm not worrying too much about the formula for this tool for code review and verification. Uh, in normal circumstances, then this won't stay far from the development. In this case, because I only set it to my number of days that I can work is 1 day per week, then that's why it's far from the development and review. Uh, Maybe this is something I can work on later on. Anyway, okay. So going back to our, so why is it now that velocity is 3.75? This is because the method that I'm going to take, remember here, I entered I already entered the date for the design part, although I still haven't done it. So it's 3.75 hours, and the number of hours that I said that I spent on the entire feature is 1. So that's why it got divided by 3.75. If I enter 3.75 here also, then this should, my present velocity will become 1. So the present velocity is based on the weighted here rather than the original estimate. That works for me. It helps me keep track of my previous velocity versus my present velocity. Um, so that's about it. This spreadsheet helped me a lot in discussing features with my client, with my boss. At the same time, it serves two purposes. One, uh, my client can review that easily from the spreadsheet. And second, I can add estimates to it so that I can tell my client when it's due. Mm, I'll share the link for this spreadsheet in the YouTube page of this episode and in our Facebook group. Uh, if you have any suggestions, I think you can comment on the spreadsheet directly. I'd love to hear suggestions on improving this spreadsheet. So that's about it. Thank you very much for checking out this podcast. I I hope to see you again next week. So take care, all of you, and good night.